Hello and welcome to this repair tutorial, and today we're going to be looking at an Arcam Alpha 8R. And the Arcam Alpha 8R was released back in 1999, and time frame probably about July August. It was retailing over £380 in the UK, so not an inconsiderable amount of money, and would probably be classed as an audiophile type amplifier. But back at that point in time, there were a lot of different brands, including British and also Japanese audio brands, which really were establishing themselves in a market leader position. So overview of specifications. So good spec on the Arcam Alpha 8 and stroke 8R. Just a little bit of clarification on that. With regard to the remote control function, that's what the R is indicating. And to anyone who's sort of interested, when you look at the front fascia, you may first of all think, well, I don't actually see where the infrared port is for the amplifier to receive the remote control signals. But it's actually at the top left hand corner. You'll see that there's a small glass or plastic window with Arcam Alpha on there, and that's where the IR detector is for the remote control. But some of the amplifiers had 8 or 8R, but fundamentally the same as the 7R series, they had the remote control function, and that just gave you the ability to drive the volume control backwards and forwards or up and down, and also to place the amplifier directly into mute if you wished. So for output power, the amplifier can deliver 50 watts per channel into 8 ohms and good levels of total harmonic distortion, so this would be 0.01%, and good features for the inputs. So we have the ability to switch from the rear, and if you just operate that switch, it's sort of recessed slightly, but with a sort of ballpoint pen you can just push it in, and once you do that, that will then select the input sensitivity for 3 millivolts, and that enables you to connect directly a turntable with a moving magnet type stylus. And then for all of the line inputs, then they're going up to 275 millivolts. And the amplifier can also provide a preamp output, which is great if you want to take the output signals and connect maybe to a secondary amplifier, and that's a voltage rating of 0.5 volts. Full range for speaker impedance, so you can go down to 4 ohms up to 16 ohms, and the amplifier also supports a by-wire input as well. And that's not uncommon. There's a lot of amplifiers out there that do that, but the Arcam amplifiers and also the Cambridge audio amplifiers have that ability as well. So this amplifier really is not so much of a repair, it's more of a service, but it does have a fault which was linked to really the most common issues, which I've spoken about before in one of the other audio repair tutorials for the Arcam 7R series. So this is the one where you have intermittent sound loss. So this isn't going to be a sort of long repair overview tutorial, because it follows fundamentally exactly the same steps as what was featured in some of the other audio blogs. So this will become quite common as you listen to some of these. There's certain amplifiers which probably appear in the workshop more often than others, and that's purely the fact that they're more popular, and there's a loyal following out there for different types of brands, and that's why you see from time to time certain repair tutorials seem repetitive, but that's because I'm trying to capture all the different amps and makes that come into the workshop. So the first part that you need to take care of is the dry solder joints, and these develop over time, and they can be on the heat related components, for example the Mosfets and the power components, but they can also be due just to deterioration of the solder connection, and these solder connections normally around the RCA input sockets, headphone sockets, but I'll run through that in a moment. And this is where you have some degree of mechanical stress. So first things first, you have to remove the rear fixing screws, so that's straightforward enough. You have 5 of those at the rear. Remove the fixing bolt, which holds the toroidal transformer in place, and then you have 3 screws which hold the board to the bottom chassis towards the front. You have a ground screw on some amplifiers, but not all. Some of the Arcam series didn't have them, which is just a grounding on the left towards the toroidal transformer. You'll also have another fixing screw which is next to the black speaker protection relay, which is the OMRON relay, and then the large bolt which secures the toroidal transformer and locks everything in place. Once you've removed those screws, then you need to remove the front fascia, so 2 screws left and right, and then you also have 2 screws then on the top. And once you remove the volume control knob, balance control, treble and bass, you can literally just unclip it, and there's 2 clips underneath, and then that pulls away, and then You have two fixing screws, top and bottom, which hold the really like the metal fascia where the user controls are mounted, and then you can lift up the amplifier main board away from the chassis, and then when you rotate it and turn it over, then you have full access then to all of the solder joints. So it's just a systematic routine, so you will work from left to right, so looking from the rear. So first thing that you do is you resolder all of the input RCA sockets, always dry jointed. Then you then come to the output Mosfets. So again, not uncommon, sometimes these amplifiers will come sort of stuck like in a standby mode, and that could be linked directly to dry joints on the output MOSFET. So again, reflow all the two MOSFETs per channel, and then in some cases you can also find that the heatsink, there's pins which come through to the main board. These can sometimes become dry jointed, so again, reflow those, gives good solid mechanical connection. Check also the speaker terminals, not uncommon again to reflow those, and then the Euro input power socket, reflow the solder connections there, and then also the headphone socket as well. Make sure you solder those. And then the next part is you have the tape switch. So again, reflow that, and then you then have the direct switch, and then the speaker set 2 switch as well. So reflow solder connections on there, and then you then have the bass, the treble control and balance control. There are always dry joints on these, so again, reflow them, make sure everything is good. You can remove the volume control locking nut, and then you can look underneath there, but it's not common to find dry joints on the volume control potentiometers, but you may wish to check that. And then you arrive at the input selection switch, and you can see in the video what I've done is just unlock the fixing screw at the front, and then I've then desoldered it from the board. And what I do here is I just keep the orientation. That's very, very important. It's quite easy if you take one of these switch assemblies apart, and then inadvertently you may, for example, get the contact switch mechanism maybe the wrong way round, and then when you reassemble it, then you can have issues when you're trying to turn, to the respective channels, and you may have, some channels which are not working correctly, or the record output, is not working correctly. So just verify, correct orientation. That's really what I'm showing on the video there. And then once I've disassembled the switch, it's a case of using a fiberglass pencil, and then I can then use that then to remove any oxidisation on there. And then I also use De-Oxit, and then I'll use a De-Oxit contact grease just to lubricate that, because it's a mechanical connection. And then once it's then reassembled, you fit it through the metal fascia cage, and then what you have to do is push down on the top of the circuit board, and this is very, very important. What you want to do is make sure that all the pins protrude through the board, and then reflow all of those. It's not uncommon again to find some of these switches will have dry joints on there. And then the next thing, or the last part, which I sort of look at, is there's 2 voltage regulators, the plus and minus 15 volt regulators. Sometimes you will have some dry joints on there as well. And then what I then do is I use De-Oxit, and I spray that directly into the user control potentiometers. Probably leave it for about 20 to 30 seconds, let the De-Oxit get into there and start to work. And then I rotate the potentiometers backwards and forwards to give that nice clean and crisp operation. And then I also spray De-Oxit directly then into the headphone socket. And then what I'll do is I'll insert and remove the headphones jack plug multiple times to make sure that those connections are all good. And then the final thing for this amplifier, as with all of these amplifiers, is just to adjust or to check the bias for each one of the channels, and that's very easy for this amplifier. So nominally you can set the input bias, the output bias for the MOSFETs from 2.2 millivolts up to approximately 2.6 millivolts. So I just set it about midpoint to 2.4. So do the initial adjustment, and then after that you can then make a final adjustment, and once that's then done, it's a simple matter then of cleaning the amplifier. You'll also see in the video what I'm showing is a crack on the bezel, and this is very common, but the good thing is the type of plastic which Arcam used to manufacture these bezels, if you use super glue, you literally, if you take say a component lead or maybe a internal screwdriver, very, very thin blade, you can literally just leak a little bit just into the crack itself, and then as soon as you push it together, it's like an instant bond. Literally within less than 2 seconds, the plastic will completely bond and really almost give you an invisible repair of the plastic bezel then. I've seen in some cases, some of the amplifiers have come in where maybe you have some damage to the bezel, but thankfully in this particular amplifier it was just a case where probably during transit, or maybe the top cover wasn't put on correctly, it's just forced a little bit of excess pressure, which has then resulted in that cracking then. So that really brings us to the end of this overview. Not too detailed, there wasn't any sort of fault finding required, just straightforward service and repair. And I thank you again for stopping by and listening. Until the next time, I wish you all the best and goodbye.